In the research methods section of the exam, you'll be given a stimulus and most of the questions will relate to the stimulus. So as you're reading through, you should be writing on the exam paper just some little notes to give yourself clues about what might come up in the paper. If you pause the video now and read through the stimulus, and you might be able to make some notes already and then restart the video. The first thing to underline is where it says following previous research, because this is a clue that we should use a directional hypothesis. Because there's been previous research, we can make a prediction about the results. The next thing to underline is where it says the prisoners did not know they were going to be part of the investigation, because this should immediately ring alarm bells to do with ethics. To the BPS guidelines being broken, there's deception, and deception will always lead to a lack of informed consent. You can also note how to deal with the deception. So you could deal with it through a debrief, which is where at the end of the investigation, participants are told the true aims and purposes and they're offered counselling and they can ask questions. Or you could deal with it through presumptive consent, which is where you ask a similar group of participants whether they would take part in the investigation and you give them all the true aims and procedures. And if they agree, you can presume that your actual participants would consent as well. There's also prior general consent, where you give people a big list of possible investigations and they tick off which ones they'd be happy to do, knowing that there'd be an element of deception. The next thing to underline is where it says the prison governor said they could use CCTV to monitor the number of aggressive acts made by prisoners. So the CCTV is a control measure. It means that we can easily check for reliability of data because we can watch the CCTV footage over and over again. Next, I would underline where it says they randomly selected 20 prisoners, because this is giving us our sampling technique. So it is a random sample. And a good thing about a random sample is that everyone has an equal opportunity of being selected, and it will avoid investigator bias. Then I would underline where it says the first week they kept the temperature of the prison the same as it always was, 25 degrees C on wing A, and lowered the temperature to 19 degrees C on wing B. So this is giving you the conditions of the IV, the independent variable. The thing that changes is the temperature. It's either going to be 19 degrees C or 25 degrees C. Then I would underline where it says the next week they lowered the temperature of the prison to 19 degrees C for wing A and kept it at 25 degrees C for wing B, because this is telling me that everybody has experienced both conditions of the IV. And that means we know our experimental design, which would be repeated measures design. We can also see the control measure here of counterbalancing. So counterbalancing is where one group does condition A followed by condition B, and the other group does condition B followed by condition A, and that counterbalancing will control for the order effects of boredom, practice, and fatigue. So we can see that the different wings experience the different temperatures in a different order. Then I would underline they monitored whether the number of aggressive acts reduced, increased, or stayed the same after the temperature was reduced. So this gives us our operationalised dependent variable. That means we're measuring to see whether the independent variable, the change in temperature, was actually having an effect on aggression levels in the prison. And the way that's measured is to say whether the number of aggressive acts reduced, increased, or stayed the same after the temperature was reduced. Overall, when looking at the stimulus, we can see the experimental method is a field experiment. And that's because the researchers have gone into a natural setting, a real prison, but they have manipulated the IV and the DV within that natural setting. After the stimulus is a table of data that's been generated, and the table also gives you clues about questions. So this table is indicating that a sign test has been used on the data. If you're not sure about sign tests, then I've put a link to a resource that you can get in the description below. The notes that I would make next to the table are the reasons that a sign test are used. So it's a test of difference, which means it's an experiment, it's a repeated measures design, and the data is nominal. Now the data doesn't look like it's nominal, but it's because if the number of aggressive acts reduced after the temperature was lowered to 19 degrees C, then you give that the sign of a plus. If the number of aggressive acts reduced, you give that a minus, and if the number of aggressive acts stayed the same, you give it a zero value, basically discount them. So the nominal data, the category is either the pluses or the minuses. I would also be able to work out the n value and the calculated value of S from the table. So the N value is the number of scores within the investigation, and we know that there were 20 prisoners who were selected to take part. However, 2 of the prisoners had the same number of aggressive acts after the temperature was lowered to 19 degrees C, so we removed those scores from the investigation. So 20 minus 2 equals 18, so N equals 18. The calculated value of S means that you add up all the pluses, which was 17, add up all the minuses, which is 1, and you take the least frequent sign. So the calculated value of S is S equals 1. If you've made notes on the exam paper, then it should help you feel more confident when answering some of the questions in the exam. However, please be aware there could be many research methods questions from the spec that come up. For example, what are the implications of the investigation to the economy? Or a question on peer review. If you would like to try the research methods papers that I've written for this particular stimulus, I've made 2, you can download them in the link in the description below with the mark scheme as well. If you're my student, you can just download them off Moodle or send me an email requesting one.